The fire crackled low in the study. Outside, December snow fell soft across the Montana fields, covering everything in white silence. Maxwell Donovan, 72 years old, weathered by 7 decades of frontier life, sat in his leather chair and studied his grandson's face. The boy was 16, old enough to understand, young enough to still believe the world owed him answers. Thomas shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the weight of his grandfather's gaze. He'd come home from his boarding school in Boston for Christmas, full of Eastern ideas and questions that didn't have easy answers. Now he was leaving again in 3 days, heading back to that other world. The world that didn't know what Montana had taught 3 generations of Donovans about survival and mercy. "Grandfather," Thomas said, finally breaking the silence, "they say at school that the West was built by ruthless men, men who took what they wanted and never looked back." Maxwell didn't answer right away. He reached for his coffee, took a slow sip, set the cup down with deliberate care. His hands were still steady despite his age. Ranch work kept a man strong if it didn't kill him first. "Those fools don't know the first damn thing," Maxwell said. His voice was quiet but carried weight, authority earned through decades of hard choices. "Let me tell you about Christmas, 1878. About the day a woman showed up at my gate half dead and the choice that defined everything that came after." Thomas leaned forward. He'd heard hints of this story before. Family legend, but never the full truth. Because real men don't take boy. Maxwell's eyes held his grandson's. They protect, even when it costs them everything they've built. The old man settled back in his chair. His gaze drifted to the window, but he was seeing something else now. Something 26 years gone. His voice changed, dropped into the cadence of memory. Montana territory. December 23rd, 1878. Dawn came cold and bitter that morning. The world was white and still when Maxwell Donovan rode his fence line that December dawn. 46 years old, then lean and weathered, shaped by 16 years of ranching and country that killed the weak and humbled the strong. The thermometer outside his kitchen had read 15 below when he'd left the house. Now, an hour into his ride, the cold had settled deep into his bones, despite his wool coat and oilskin duster. His breath misted in the air. His horse's breath came in great plumes of steam. The gelding ranger picked his way carefully through snow that reached past his fetlocks. 2 feet had fallen in the last 3 days. More was coming. Maxwell could read weather in his sleep now. Mare's tail clouds the previous evening, cattle bunching tight, birds gone silent and scarce. Another storm would hit by nightfall, a big one. He needed to check the eastern fence line before it came. Needed to know his boundaries were secure. Needed to know where his cattle were grouped. Winter was the season when a rancher earned his keep or lost everything he'd built. The Donovan Ranch covered 640 acres. One full section under the Homestead Act of 1862. 16 years of work had transformed raw wilderness into something that could sustain life. Cattle grazed in his pastures. Hay filled his barn. Water from Coldwater Spring kept his stock alive through the brutal Montana winters. It was honest work. Hard work. The kind that marked a man's hands and tested his character daily. Maxwell crested a small rise and saw his eastern gate below, the main entrance to his property. Solid wood posts, strong crossbeam iron hinges that didn't freeze. He'd built it himself 12 years ago. Built it to last. Something was wrong. He saw the boots first, worn leather, caked with frozen mud and ice. Then the rest. A woman collapsed against the gatepost, slumped like someone had cut her strings and let her fall. One arm wrapped around the post as if she'd been trying to hold herself upright. The other hand clutched something against her chest. A piece of paper folded. She held it the way a drowning person holds driftwood. Maxwell's gut went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the December air. He was moving before conscious thought caught up. Ranger sensed his urgency and quickened pace, plunging through the deep snow. Maxwell swung down from the saddle while the horse was still moving. His boots hit the frozen ground, and he was running knee-deep in powder-heart hammering. Up close, the situation was worse than he'd thought. Much worse. The woman wasn't moving. Her face was the color of old wax lips, blue skin, that terrible translucent shade that meant hypothermia had progressed to critical stages. Ice crystals had formed in her hair. Frost covered her eyelashes. Her clothes were soaked through, frozen stiff in places. She wore a thin wool coat that might have been adequate for autumn, but was death in December, Montana. No gloves, no hat, nothing adequate for survival in this cold. Maxwell dropped to his knees beside her, snow soaking through his pants. He stripped off his glove and pressed two fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse. For several terrible seconds he felt nothing. Then faint and irregular, a flutter. Life. Barely. Ma'am. His voice cut through the silence. Ma'am, can you hear me? Nothing, just the rattle of her breathing. Shallow, desperate. The sound of lungs fighting for air that was too cold to process. He didn't waste time asking more questions. With practiced efficiency, he scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, maybe 95 pounds, less probably, severely malnourished. Her body was all sharp angles and wasted muscle. How long had she been walking? How far had she come? The paper she'd been clutching fell into the snow. Maxwell bent awkward with her weight and retrieved it, tucked it into his coat pocket. Whatever it was, it had mattered enough to her to hold on to while she was dying. He lifted her onto Ranger's saddle mounted behind her and held her against his chest. She was frighteningly cold, even through both their coats. Her head lolled against his shoulder. He wrapped his oilskin duster around her as best he could and kicked Ranger into motion. The ride back to the ranch house took 8 minutes. 8 minutes during which Maxwell talked. Not because she could hear him, but because he needed to hear human sound in the terrible silence of her dying. Stay with me now, just a little longer. House is close. We've got fire, got warm blankets. Mrs. Lynn knows medicine better than most doctors. She'll know what to do. You just hold on. The woman made no sound, no response. But her chest kept rising and falling. Barely. It was enough. The ranch house came into view. Solid log construction, smoke rising from the stone chimney, light glowing in the windows. Home, safety, everything this frozen stranger needed. Maxwell pulled Ranger to a halt at the porch steps and called out, Mrs. Lynn. The door opened before he'd finished dismounting. Mrs. Lynn stood in the doorway, 58 years old, Chinese, weathered by 3 decades on the Montana frontier. She took one look at the bundle in Maxwell's arms and moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen death before and knew how to fight it. Guest room, she said. Get the fire high. I'll need warm water, not hot, and clean blankets. Move. They worked in tandem. 16 years they'd worked together. 16 years since Maxwell's mother had died and Mrs. Lynn had stayed on to keep house for him. They knew each other's rhythms, anticipated needs without speaking. Maxwell carried the woman to the guest room. Small but comfortable. Clean sheets, good mattress, window facing east to catch morning sun. He laid her on the bed while Mrs. Lynn built up the fire until the room glowed with heat. Strip the wet clothes, Mrs. Lynn ordered, bringing in a basin of water. Carefully, frozen wool can tear skin. Together they peeled away the woman's sodden garments. Coat first heavy with ice, then dress simple calico, threadbare in places. Undergarments soaked through. Everything went into a pile on the floor. Maxwell averted his eyes as much as practicality allowed. This was medicine, not intimacy, but it still felt invasive. Wrong somehow to expose someone so vulnerable. Under the clothes, the truth was worse. The woman's body told a story of prolonged suffering. Ribs visible through skin, hip bones jutting sharp, muscle wasted from starvation. Her feet were the worst. Blistered, bloody, wrapped in what looked like strips of old cloth that had frozen into the wounds. 4 days, Mrs. Lynn said quietly, examining the feet. Maybe 5. She's been walking that long at least. Through December, Montana, Maxwell's voice was flat, stating fact. But underneath ran anger. Who lets someone walk 4 days through winter? What kind of people does that make us? Mrs. Lynn didn't answer. She was already working. Warm water, not hot, carefully applied. Body temperature had to rise slowly. Too fast and the heart would stop from shock. She'd learned that 30 years ago the hard way. Learned it from Maxwell's mother, who'd known frontier medicine the way some women knew embroidery. They rubbed circulation back into the woman's extremities, wrapped her in clean wool blankets, propped her head on pillows, checked her breathing every few minutes, monitored the faint pulse. The woman's face cleaned of frost and dirt was young. Early 30s, Maxwell guessed. Pretty in the way frontier women often were. Not delicate prettiness, but something stronger. Bones that spoke of resilience. A jaw that suggested stubbornness. The kind of face that endured. Her eyes fluttered open once. Brief, disoriented, gray eyes, startled. Seeing lamplight and unfamiliar ceiling and a stranger's concerned face bent over hers. Fear flickered across her features. Then her eyes closed again and she sank back into unconsciousness. "She'll live," Mrs. Lynn said after an hour of steady work. "Body temperature is rising, pulse is stronger, feet will heal if infection doesn't set in." She was lucky. Lucky. Maxwell looked at the broken woman in his guest bed. "She nearly died at my gate." "But she didn't. That's luck." Mrs. Lynn straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back. "She walked a long way, Mr. Donovan. A long, desperate way." The paper crinkled in Maxwell's coat pocket. He'd forgotten about it in the rush of emergency care. Now he pulled it out, unfolded it carefully by the lamplight. Quality paper, heavier than standard. Official letterhead at the top. Cedar Falls Community Church. Reverend William Hayes. The handwriting was steady, pastoral, educated. Maxwell recognized the name. Hayes. He'd met the man 3 years ago, young pastor family in trouble with railroad debt. Maxwell had helped, loaned money interest-free. The Hayes family had paid it back within a year. The note was short, direct. Maxwell Donovan. This woman is Grace Thornton, widow of Deputy Daniel Thornton, who died protecting Cedar Falls 8 months ago. The bank robbery that took Daniel's life left 4 hostages alive, 2 of them children. Cedar Falls buried Daniel as a hero. 2 weeks later, they drove his widow out for bringing bad luck. They refused her service at shops. They threw stones at her door. They said her grief was inappropriate. "I am the new pastor here. I watched this town's cruelty and could not stop it. But I can give her a chance. Your mother, Catherine, wrote to me before she died 3 years ago. She said, if you meet someone the world has abandoned, send them to my son. He will do what's right." Mrs. Thornton walked 4 days through December, cold to reach you. She has nothing. No money, no family, no hope. I'm asking you to prove your mother right. Reverend William Hayes, Cedar Falls, Montana Territory. Maxwell read it twice, then a third time, each word settling into his understanding like stones dropped in deep water, making ripples, changing things. His mother, Catherine Donovan, dead 3 years now, but still reaching across time to shape his choices. She'd known. Somehow she'd known he would need this, need to be reminded what mattered. Need to remember that strength wasn't measured in acres owned or cattle raised, but in moments like this. Moments when you chose between comfort and conviction. Mrs. Lynn watched him read, waited. She knew that look. The way Maxwell's jaw set when he was making decisions that would cost him something. "What does it say?" she asked quietly. Maxwell set the note on the bedside table, looked at the woman sleeping there. Grace Thornton, widow, refugee from cruelty dressed as righteousness, walking 4 days because she had nowhere else to go. "It says she's walked far enough." Mrs. Lynn nodded, no surprise in her expression, just acceptance. She'd known what his answer would be before he'd said it. "I'll make broth, something light for when she wakes. Her stomach won't handle much at first." "Thank you." "Don't thank me, Mr. Donovan. Thank your mother. She taught us both what matters." After Mrs. Lynn left, Maxwell stood by the window. Beyond the glass, snow continued to fall. The storm he'd predicted was building. Wind picking up, temperature dropping. Another degree or two and it would hit 20 below, maybe colder. If Grace Thornton had spent one more night outside, she'd be dead now. Frozen solid. Another unmarked grave in Montana Territory. Another woman the world had decided didn't matter. But she'd made it, barely. And now she was here, in his house, under his protection, whether she knew it yet or not. Maxwell picked up the note again. Read his mother's words, filtered through Reverend Hayes' hand. "He will do what's right." "I will, Mama," he said to the empty room. To the memory 3 years cold. "God help me, I will." Grace Thornton woke to whiteness, clean white plaster ceiling, clean white sheets, pale sunlight through a window showing endless white snow. For one confused, disoriented moment, she thought she'd died. Thought this was Mercy's first room in whatever came after Montana winter and desperation. Then pain arrived. Her feet throbbed. Deep burning pain that meant nerve damage healing. Her hands ached with returning circulation. Her throat felt scraped raw. Every breath hurt. Not heaven then. Still earth, still hurting. She tried to sit up. Failed. Tried again. Her body didn't want to cooperate. Muscles weak from starvation and exposure. Everything felt heavy and distant and wrong. The door opened. A woman entered carrying a tray. Steam rose from a bowl. The smell of beef broth made Grace's stomach clench with sudden desperate hunger. The woman was Chinese, middle-aged, kind eyes set in a face that had seen hard years and survived them. She wore a simple gray dress, clean white apron, moved with quiet efficiency. "You're awake? Good." The woman's voice was calm, matter of fact. She set the tray on the bedside table. "I'm Mrs. Lynn. You're at the Donovan Ranch. You're safe now." Safe. The word sounded foreign. Grace couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe. "How long?" Her voice came out as a croak, barely recognizable as human speech. "Since dawn. It's late afternoon now, December 23rd. Mrs. Lynn poured water from a pitcher, held the glass to Grace's lips. Small sip. "Your throat's been damaged by the cold." The water was cool and perfect. Grace wanted to gulp it, drain the whole glass, but she forced herself to sip. Small amounts. Her stomach couldn't handle more. "Where am I from?" "Donovan Ranch, Montana Territory, about 40 miles west of Cedar Falls." Mrs. Lynn set the glass down and picked up the bowl of broth. "Mr. Donovan found you collapsed at his gate this morning. You were nearly frozen to death." Memory came back in fragments, walking. So much walking, cold that ate through everything. The gatepost, holding the note, thinking this was the end. Then strong arms lifting her, a man's voice, the blessed relief of letting go. "I can't pay him." Panic rose in Grace's chest. "I don't have anything. I shouldn't have come. I shouldn't have assumed." "Mr. Donovan didn't ask for payment." Mrs. Lynn's voice was firm, kind, but brooking no argument. "He asked if you take sugar in your coffee." Grace's breath caught. She'd expected demands. Expected to be turned out once she was conscious enough to walk. Expected the world to keep being cruel because that was all she knew anymore. "I don't understand." "You will." Mrs. Lynn helped Grace sit up, propped pillows behind her. "For now, drink this, slowly. Your stomach's been empty too long. Too much too fast will make you sick." The broth was beef and salt and warmth. It tasted like life itself. Grace's hands shook, holding the bowl, but she managed. Each sip felt like resurrection, like coming back from somewhere far and cold. "Mr. Donovan read your letter," Mrs. Lynn said after a moment. "He knows your story. He knows Reverend Hayes sent you." Grace closed her eyes. Of course he'd read it. The note she'd clutched through 4 days of walking. Her last desperate hope. "What did he say?" "He said you've walked far enough." Grace's throat closed. Not from the cold this time. From something else. Something she'd forgotten existed in the world. Kindness without strings. Help without demands. Grace without price. "Thank you," she whispered. It felt inadequate, insufficient to express what she was feeling. But it was all she had. A sound at the door made them both turn. A man stood there. Tall, maybe 6 feet, weathered by sun and wind and hard work. 40-something. Silver threading through brown hair. Blue eyes that looked like they'd seen their share of winters and survived each one. He held a coffee tray in work-roughened hands. "Mrs. Thornton." His voice was quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who chose his words carefully. "I'm Maxwell Donovan. This is my ranch. You're welcome here." Grace stared at him, tried to sit straight or failed. Everything hurt too much. "Mr. Donovan, I'm sorry to impose. I didn't know where else you're not imposing." He stepped into the room, set the coffee tray on the table, poured a cup with steady hands. "You're recovering." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, assessing. Two wounded people recognizing something in each other. Some shared understanding of what it meant to survive. "Why are you helping me?" Grace asked finally. The question that mattered most. Maxwell Donovan looked at her, really looked. And in that look, Grace saw recognition, understanding, the kind that only came from personal experience with loss and judgment and cruelty dressed as concern. Because someone should have long before you walked 4 days through winter to survive. The answer was simple, direct, true. Grace felt something crack open in her chest. Some wall she'd built to keep functioning through 8 months of hell. Tears threatened. She fought them back. She'd cried enough, lost enough, bled enough. But this man's simple statement of decency undid her more than all the cruelty had. Because cruelty, she understood now, expected, could brace against. Kindness was dangerous. Kindness could break her completely. "Thank you," she managed. Inadequate again. But all she had. Maxwell nodded once. Acknowledgement. Then he stepped back toward the door. "Rest. Mrs. Lynn will check on you. We'll talk when you're stronger." After he left, Grace sat holding her coffee cup, watching steam rise, feeling warmth seep into hands that had been frozen so long she'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, lamplight held steady. For the first time in 8 months, Grace Thornton allowed herself to hope. Just a little. Just enough to keep breathing. Evening found them in Maxwell's study. The room smelled of leather and wood smoke and old paper. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls. A massive desk sat beneath the window. 2 leather chairs faced the stone fireplace, where logs crackled and popped, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. A clock ticked quiet rhythm, measuring time in steady beats. Grace sat in one chair, hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She'd bathed, changed into a borrowed dress from Mrs. Lynn, eaten bread and more broth. Her feet were wrapped in clean bandages. Her hands still ached, but the frostbite wasn't severe. She'd keep all her fingers. The toes were more questionable. Time would tell. Maxwell sat in the other chair, not interrogating, not demanding, just present, waiting, giving her space to speak or stay silent as she chose. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The storm Maxwell had predicted was building. Wind rattled the windows, temperature dropping toward 20 below. Inside, the fire held, warmth and safety. Everything the world outside wasn't. "I should tell you my story," Grace said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "You deserve to know who you're sheltering. Only if you are ready. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready, but you should know." Grace set her coffee down, looked into the fire, found it easier to speak to flames than to meet his eyes. "My husband was Deputy Daniel Thornton, Cedar Falls, Montana Territory. We'd been married 6 years. He was a good man, honest, brave, the kind of man who believed in right and wrong without gray areas between." Maxwell didn't interrupt, just listened, the gift of attention freely given. August 15th, 1878, 3 men tried to rob the bank. Grace's voice stayed steady. She told this story to herself 1,000 times, worn the edges smooth. Daniel was making rounds when he heard shooting. He went in, confronted them. They had 4 hostages, 2 women, 2 children, 8 and 11 years old. She paused, remembering. Daniel's face that morning. The way he'd kissed her goodbye. Told her he'd be home for supper. The ordinary promises of an ordinary day that turned extraordinary through violence. There was a shootout. Daniel was shot twice, shoulder and abdomen. But he returned fire, killed one of the robbers. Timothy Bradford, 24 years old. Wounded another who escaped but died later from infection. The third was captured. Your husband saved those hostages. He did. All 4 walked out alive. Daniel died 3 days later. Peritonitis. The abdominal wound got infected. Frontier doctor did what he could, but Grace shrugged. Death was death. Medicine only delayed it sometimes. The whole town came to his funeral. 200 people. They called him a hero. They weren't wrong. What happened after? Grace's jaw tightened. Here was where the story turned, where hero's widow became town curse, where grief became scandal. The first 2 weeks were fine. People brought food, offered condolences, said all the right things. Then it changed. How? Whispers first, then avoidance, then active cruelty. Grace's hands clenched, old anger rising. They said I brought bad luck, old superstition, widow energy cursing the town. My grief was too loud when I cried in church, then too quiet when I stopped attending events. I couldn't win. Maxwell's expression hardened, anger there. Controlled but present. They punished you for mourning. They did worse than that. Grace forced herself to continue, to speak the worst of it, the part that still woke her at night. Mr. Donovan, Maxwell, I was pregnant when Daniel died. Maxwell went very still, the kind of stillness that meant everything had just shifted, changed, become more serious than it already was. 2 months along, we'd just told his parents. We were happy, careful but happy. Grace's voice cracked. First real break in her composure. I lost the baby 2 weeks after burying in Daniel. Stress, grief. The doctor said these things happen. But the town, she had to stop, breathe, force the words out. The town said God took my child because I was cursed, because Daniel's death was judgment, that I'd brought death to Cedar Falls and God was punishing me for it. Jesus Christ. Maxwell's whisper was prayer and curse combined. She was perfect. Grace looked at her hands, saw them holding that tiny body. Cold, still, perfect in every way except breathing. So small but perfect. I buried her next to Daniel. No funeral. Just me and the gravedigger. No one else would come. The room was silent except for fire crackling and wind howling outside. Grace let the silence stretch. Let Maxwell absorb what she'd told him. Let him understand the full weight of what Cedar Falls had done. The doctor who delivered my stillborn daughter refused to see me again. She continued eventually. Said he couldn't be associated with bad luck. The general store refused service. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid me. Children threw rocks at my windows. Someone left an anonymous note. Leave before you curse someone else. And the pastor, old Pastor Miller, told me I should consider relocating for the community's peace. Bitterness made Grace's voice sharp. Then he retired. Reverend Hayes replaced him in September. Young man, idealistic. He saw what was happening. Tried defending me from the pulpit. Half the congregation walked out. Hayes is a good man. He is. He gave me $40, his whole month's salary, wrote that letter. Told me about you, about your mother, Catherine. Said you were a fair man, a good man, that you'd help me because it was right. Grace finally met Maxwell's eyes. I walked 4 days to find out if he was correct. Maxwell stood, walked to the window, looked out at darkness and snow. Montana, vast and empty beyond the glass. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but certain. Your husband was a hero. Your grief was honest. Your loss was real. There was nothing wrong with any of it. He turned to face her. They punished you for being human, for feeling what any person would feel. That's not justice, it's cruelty. Why does that matter to you? Grace asked, needing to understand. You don't know me. No, but I know what it's like when people decide you're broken in ways you're not, when they judge you for surviving wrong, when comfort becomes more important than truth. Maxwell returned to his chair, sat, fixed her with those steady blue eyes. Grace, while you're here, you're under my protection. That means something in Montana territory. It means no one touches you, no one hurts you, no one makes you feel less than human. Do you understand? Grace's breath shook. Why? Because my mother raised me better than to turn away someone in need. Because Reverend Hayes was right to send you here. Because, he paused, choosing words carefully, because someone has to stand between decent people and the world's cruelty. Might as well be me. Grace felt tears slide down her face, didn't bother wiping them away, didn't care anymore. This man, this stranger, offering protection and shelter and basic human decency, things that should have been simple, should have been expected, but had become precious beyond measure. Thank you. Inadequate again, always inadequate, but sincere. You'll stay through Christmas at least. After that, we'll see what makes sense. But know this, Maxwell's voice carried weight. I'm not the kind of man who helps someone then throws them out when it becomes inconvenient. You're safe here, for as long as you need. Grace nodded, couldn't speak, could only nod and cry and feel the first real safety she'd known in 8 months settle around her like the borrowed shawl Mrs. Lynn had draped over her shoulders. The old man's voice caught. Even after 26 years, the memory of Grace's suffering still moved him. Thomas sat forward, young face troubled. She lost everything, the boy said quietly. Her husband, her baby, her home. She did. Maxwell took a slow sip of cold coffee. But she didn't lose herself. That's what mattered most. How did she keep going? Sometimes survival isn't a choice, boy. It's just what remains when everything else is taken. Maxwell's voice was gentle but firm. Grace survived because surrender wasn't in her nature. Just like it wasn't in my mother. Just like it's not in you. Thomas absorbed this, nodding slowly. The hard part's coming now, Maxwell continued, where I had to choose between land and mercy, between protecting my property and protecting her. He looked steadily at his grandson. Every man faces that choice eventually. How he chooses defines him. What did you choose? Keep listening, you'll see. Outside, the storm hit full force. Wind screaming, snow driving horizontal, temperature plummeting toward dangerous depths. But inside, Maxwell Donovan's study firelight held steady. Warmth remained. Two wounded people sat together in comfortable silence, and for the first time in a long time, neither was alone. The fire in Maxwell Donovan's study had burned down to embers. The clock showed nearly midnight. Christmas Eve in a few hours. Grace had gone to bed. Exhaustion had finally claimed her after she told her story. Mrs. Lynn had guided her back to the guest room, made sure she had everything she needed, left her to sleep and heal. Now Maxwell sat alone, staring at flames, thinking about choices and consequences, about his mother's letter filtered through Reverend Hayes's hand, about a frozen woman at his gate and the decision that would define everything. He picked up the note again. Read it by dying firelight. His mother's wisdom speaking across 3 years of death. He will do what's right. Maxwell thought about Elizabeth, his wife who'd left him 5 years ago, run off with a traveling merchant because Montana wasn't enough, wasn't civilized enough, wasn't society enough. She'd wanted Denver, wanted culture and comfort and ease. She'd wanted anything except hard winters and harder work, and a husband who loved land more than luxury. The town had lied for him, called it fever when everyone knew the truth. Elizabeth Hartford Donovan had abandoned her husband and died 6 months later in a wagon accident in Wyoming territory. The ultimate desertion. Not just leaving, but dying where he couldn't even have the closure of a proper goodbye. Maxwell had let them lie, let them say fever, let them preserve his dignity at the cost of truth. And he'd hated every moment of it. Hated the pity, hated the careful avoidance of reality, hated being treated like he couldn't handle his own life's honesty. That's why Grace's story hit him so hard. Cedar Falls had done to her what his own town had done to him. Controlled the narrative, decided how she was allowed to grieve, judged her for not performing suffering the way they wanted, then punished her when she failed to meet their impossible standards. He wouldn't do that to her, wouldn't let anyone do that to her while she was under his roof. His protection. The decision was made, had been made the moment he'd seen her collapsed at his gate. Everything after was just details. Logistics, the working out of what his heart had already committed to. Grace Thornton would stay. Through Christmas, through winter if needed, as long as it took for her to heal and decide her own future. And if that caused talk, if it cost him reputation or standing or whatever else people thought mattered, well, some things were worth the price, his mother had known. Somehow Catherine Donovan had known her son would need this. Need to remember that strength wasn't measured in acres or cattle or comfort. Strength was standing between the vulnerable and the world's teeth, even when it cost everything. I understand, Mama, Maxwell said to the dying fire, to memory 3 years cold. I finally understand what you tried to teach me. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Maxwell Donovan made his peace with the choice that would change his life. And when he finally stood and headed to bed, his sleep was deep and dreamless. The sleep of a man whose conscience was clear. The frozen widow at his gate was safe now, protected, given sanctuary. That was enough. For tonight, that was enough. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, mercy had won. Christmas Eve morning came cold and clear. The storm had passed during the night, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh powder. Sunlight made the snow glitter like scattered diamonds. Temperatures still held below zero. The kind of cold that killed cattle if you weren't careful. The kind that tested every rancher's preparation and skill. Maxwell was in the barn before dawn, checking stock, making sure water troughs weren't frozen solid, counting heads to verify no animals had drifted during the storm. 43 steers, 12 cows, all accounted for, all alive. Small victories, but they mattered in Montana winter. He was spreading hay when he heard riders approaching, 3 horses, moving fast despite the deep snow. Maxwell straightened, set down his pitchfork, walked to the barn door and watched them come. Jackson Mercer rode in front, 51 years old, prosperous rancher, Maxwell's closest neighbor and longtime acquaintance. Not quite friend, but not enemy either. The relationship men developed when they lived 20 miles apart and relied on each other for survival. Behind Jackson rode 2 of his ranch hands, young men, strong, the kind hired for muscle as much as skill. This wasn't a social call. Maxwell stepped out into the morning cold. Let them come to him. Defensive position without being obvious about it. His ranch, his ground. He didn't need to meet them halfway. Jackson reined his bay gelding to a halt 10 feet away. Steam rose from the horse's nostrils. The animal's coat was dark with sweat despite the cold. They'd ridden hard. Maxwell, Jackson's voice was neutral, controlled, the tone men used when delivering bad news. Jackson. Maxwell didn't move, didn't invite them down, just waited. Need a word about your guest. Mrs. Thornton is recovering from exposure. She's not receiving visitors. That's not what I meant. Jackson glanced at his men. Some silent communication. They stayed mounted but alert. Can we speak privately? Maxwell considered. Weighed options, decided privacy might be better than an audience. Barn office, 5 minutes. He led them inside. The barn office was small, desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinet, walls covered in ranch records and cattle breeding charts. Practical space, working space, no comfort, no hospitality offered. Jackson's men stayed outside. Jackson followed Maxwell in, closed the door. The temperature inside wasn't much warmer than outside, but at least the wind couldn't reach them. Say what you came to say. Maxwell didn't sit, didn't offer Jackson a seat, just stood, arms crossed, waiting. Folks are talking Maxwell, bachelor and widow, alone out here. You know how it looks. Looks like hospitality. Man helping someone in need. Some are talking about involving the territorial marshal. Questioning propriety. Maxwell's jaw tightened. Let them question. My conscience is clear. Jackson shifted his weight. Uncomfortable. Whatever he'd come to say, the hard part was coming. Maxwell, Franklin Pierce put out word he's contesting your water rights. The world seemed to tilt. Maxwell went very still. The kind of still that meant everything had just become serious. Dangerous. Explain. Pierce claims your spring water source crosses onto his territory, says he's got survey documents proving it, filed formal complaint in Virginia City 3 days ago. Hearing set for January 15th. Maxwell's mind raced. Cold water, spring, the lifeblood of his ranch. Without that water, his cattle wouldn't survive winter. Without cattle, the ranch was worthless. 16 years of work turned to nothing if Pierce succeeded. Pierce doesn't own land anywhere near my spring. He bought sections 14 and 15 last month from the railroad. Says his survey shows the spring originates on section 15. Claims prior appropriation. Prior appropriation, Montana water law, first use established rights. But Maxwell had been using cold water spring since 1867. 11 years, documented, recorded, legal. I've got survey maps from Territorial Office. Springs clearly on section 22, my section. Pierce's lawyers say those surveys are inaccurate. They've got their own from 1865. Says it proves the spring starts on his land and flows onto yours. 1865. Maxwell's voice was hard. I wasn't even here in 65. Nobody was surveying this region then. The maps don't exist. They do now. Jackson's meaning was clear. Pierce had created evidence, bought or forged documents, whatever it took. Why are you telling me this? Jackson looked uncomfortable. Because Pierce is using your situation with the widow as character evidence. Says you're unfit to hold homestead. Says harboring an unrelated woman of questionable reputation violates the moral character requirement in the Homestead Act. The pieces clicked together. Pierce wanted Maxwell's land, wanted the water, was using Grace's leverage. Social scandal to undermine legal standing. It was smart, ruthless, exactly the kind of move a Denver speculator would make. He's got Judge Morrison in his pocket, Jackson continued. Probably. Everyone knows Morrison takes bribes. You need an impeccable reputation to fight this. No scandal, no questions about your character. The implication hung heavy between them. Send Grace away. Save the ranch. Choose property over principle. No, Maxwell's voice was flat, final. Maxwell, think about this. 16 years of work, your whole life. Don't throw it away for a woman you just met. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm doing what's right. Right doesn't matter if you lose everything. Then I'll lose everything. Maxwell met Jackson's eyes. Let him see the determination there, the conviction. But I won't turn away someone who needs help just because it's convenient for a land grabber. Jackson stared at him. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You're a stubborn fool, Maxwell Donovan. Probably, but I'm my mother's son, and she'd never forgive me if I chose land over mercy. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. Acknowledgement, if not agreement. I said what I came to say. What you do with it is your business. Merry Christmas, Maxwell. Merry Christmas, Jackson. After they left, Maxwell stood in the coal barn office and let the weight of it settle. Pierce was coming for his ranch, using Grace as a weapon, targeting everything Maxwell had built, and Maxwell had just committed to fighting with both hands tied, because he wouldn't send Grace away. Wouldn't make her homeless again, just to save himself. Some choices were easy. Some were hard. This one was both. He walked back toward the house. Needed to tell Grace. Needed to figure out their next move. Needed to prepare for a fight that would cost him, no matter how it ended. Grace was standing in the doorway, wrapped in Mrs. Lynn's shawl, face pale. She'd heard everything. The barn office wasn't that far from the house. Voices carried in winter silence. I have to leave. Her voice shook. I'm costing you your land. You're not costing me anything Pierce wasn't already trying to take. But I'm making it easier for him. Grace's hands twisted in the shawl, anguish clear on her face. I won't be responsible for you losing everything. Mrs. Lynn appeared behind Grace, set a hand on her shoulder. Firm, grounding. Running doesn't make them right, dear. It makes them comfortable. Mrs. Lynn is correct. Maxwell climbed the porch steps, stood before Grace. Let her see his certainty. This isn't about you. It's about Pierce wanting my water rights. He'd have found another excuse if you weren't here. You don't know that? I do. Mrs. Lynn's voice was quiet but carried weight. Franklin Pierce tried to buy this ranch from Catherine Donovan 15 years ago. She refused. Told him the land would stay with her family or nobody. He's hated the Donovans ever since. Grace looked between them. What? Pierce is a land speculator from Denver. Mrs. Lynn guided Grace back inside. Maxwell followed it. They gathered in the kitchen. Warm, safe, good place for hard truths. He came to Montana in the 1860s, bought railroad land, squeezed out small ranchers, built an empire on other people's suffering. He also pushed for the Chinese Exclusion Act in Montana territory. Mrs. Lynn's voice stayed level, but something burned underneath. Old anger, old pain. Tried to drive out Chinese workers. Said we were taking jobs from white men. Your husband's mother stood against him, publicly. Made him look foolish in front of the territorial legislature. Maxwell remembered. He'd been 30, young, proud of his mother for standing up, not understanding the cost, not realizing Pierce would carry that grudge for decades. So this is revenge. Grace's voice was small. Against your mother, through you. This is a powerful man using whatever leverage he can find. Maxwell set coffee to brew, needed something to do with his hands. You're convenient, not causal. If you left, he'd find another angle. Grace sank into a chair, looked at her bandaged hands. What will you do? Fight. We'll go to the hearing, present our evidence. Prove the water rights are legal. Prove my character is sound despite what Pierce claims. How can you prove that with me here? By showing the community we have nothing to hide. Maxwell poured 3 cups of coffee, set them on the table, sat across from Grace. Tomorrow's Christmas. Chapel service. We're going together. Grace's face went pale. I can't. They'll tear me apart. Not while I'm standing there. Maxwell. She said his first name. Desperate. You don't understand what you're asking. These people, they'll judge you for even bringing me. They'll use it against you. Maybe, or maybe they'll see what I see. A woman who did nothing wrong being treated like she did. Mrs. Lynn set a hand on Grace's shoulder. Catherine used to say something. She learned it from her mother, from the women who crossed the continent in wagons. Women help women. The world won't, so we must. But I'm not asking for help. Grace's voice broke. I'm destroying your life just by being here. No. Maxwell's voice was firm. Absolute. You're surviving. There's nothing destructive about that. Silence filled the kitchen. Clock ticking, coffee cooling, 3 people at a crossroads. Maxwell watched Grace struggle, saw the war in her eyes, fear and hope fighting for dominance. Finally she spoke, voice barely above whisper. If I do this, if I go with you tomorrow and it makes things worse, promise you'll let me leave. I promise that whatever happens, the choice to stay or go will be yours, not mine, not the community's, yours. Grace searched his face, looking for deception, found only conviction. Why are you doing this? Maxwell thought about his answer, about truth and lies in the space between. Because my mother raised me to believe that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by who he protects when it costs him everything. The words settled, truth spoken plain, no decoration, no false humility, just fact. Grace nodded slowly. All right, I'll go with you tomorrow, to chapel. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see what it costs you. The afternoon was spent in preparation. Maxwell's study became war room. Maps spread across his desk. Legal documents stacked in precise order. Water rights surveys from 1867 and 1868. Cattle inventory ledgers showing 11 years of spring water usage. Letters from the territorial surveyor confirming spring location. Everything documented, everything preserved. Grace studied the papers with surprising focus. She'd had education. Maxwell could see it in how she read, how she understood legal language, how she asked smart questions about prior appropriation law and homestead requirements. The Homestead Act requires good moral character. Grace held up the relevant statute. Read aloud. Claimant must demonstrate fitness to hold property through lawful behavior and community standing. That's vague enough to mean anything. Intentionally so. Maxwell pointed to another document. But look here, territorial precedent, Johnson versus Martinez, 1875. Court ruled that hospitality and charity demonstrate moral character rather than undermine it. Will Pierce's lawyers know about Johnson versus Martinez? Probably, but we'll make sure Judge Morrison remembers it. Mrs. Lynn entered with fresh coffee and bread, set the tray down. You should teach Mrs. Thornton about ranch work. If she's staying, she needs to understand what you're protecting. Maxwell considered. It made sense. Grace needed to see what was at stake, needed to understand why this land mattered so much. Can you walk the feet? Grace stood, tested her weight, winced but held steady. I can manage. Bundle up. Montana cold doesn't forgive tourists. Outside, the temperature had climbed to maybe 5 below. Barely. The kind of cold that burned exposed skin in minutes. Grace wore Mrs. Lynn's heavy wool coat, scarf wrapped around her face, gloves on her damaged hands. She looked small against the vast white landscape. Fragile. But she didn't complain. just followed Maxwell toward the barn. This is Ranger. Maxwell led her to the big bay gelding. 16 years old, sound, smart, good winter horse. Grace reached out carefully. Let Ranger sniff her glove. The horse huffed warm breath and allowed her to stroke his neck. Horses read people better than people read horses. Maxwell checked Ranger's hooves, lifted each one, examined for ice buildup. He likes you. That's good judgment on his part. I don't know anything about ranching. You will, if you stay. Maxwell moved to the next stall. This is winter work, different from summer. In summer, cattle graze, find their own food. Water's plentiful. Weather's manageable. Winter is survival. He showed her the hay stores, explained rationing. Each steer needed 30 pounds per day in deep cold. Any less and they'd start burning body fat, lose weight, weaken, die. How do you know how much to store? Count your stock in October. Calculate based on worst case. 6 months of winter, extra for late spring snow. Maxwell opened the hay loft, showed her the organized bales. I cut this hay last July, stacked it, dried it. Every bale represents survival. They walked to the water trough. Ice had formed overnight despite Maxwell's earlier work. He picked up a long-handled axe, demonstrated the technique. Strike at angle, break ice without damaging the trough. Clear the opening. Let cattle access liquid water. Why not just let them eat snow? Eating snow burns more calories than it provides in hydration. Cattle can die of thirst surrounded by snow. He handed her the axe. Try. Grace took it awkwardly, swung, missed. Tried again. Connected but without force. Third swing. Better. She was learning, adjusting, understanding the rhythm. Good. Again. She swung, broke through. Ice chunks scattered. Water gleamed dark underneath. In a blizzard, this is the difference between life and death. Maxwell took the axe back, set it aside. Cattle can survive cold, can survive wind, cannot survive without water. This trough is checked every 4 hours in extreme weather, every 6 in moderate cold. You do this alone? I have 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, good men. But winter is when ranchers earn their keep. The work never stops. They walked the fence line. Maxwell showed her how to spot damage, where snow weight could break posts, where animals might try to push through. He explained property boundaries, section lines, survey markers, the legal framework that turned wilderness into owned land. 640 acres. Grace looked across the white expanse. It seems impossible. One man controlling so much. Not controlling, stewarding. There's a difference. Maxwell pointed toward distant mountains. That land doesn't belong to me. I belong to it. My job is keeping it healthy, productive, sustainable. If I fail, the land continues. I don't. They reached the spring, cold water spring, source of everything. A natural artesian well where water bubbled up from deep underground. Even in winter, it didn't freeze. The constant flow and underground warmth kept it liquid, life in solid form. This is what Pierce wants. Maxwell crouched beside the spring. Let cold water run over his bare hand. Water rights in Montana territory are more valuable than gold. Whoever controls water controls survival. Grace knelt beside him, looked at the clear water, understood suddenly, completely. This wasn't about land, about property, about money. This was about life itself. You can't let him take this. I won't, but I also won't sacrifice you to keep it. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Understanding, respect, the beginning of partnership. Real strength isn't in your hands, boy. It's in choosing to use them for good, even when no one's watching. Maxwell said it quiet, more to himself than her. His mother's words filtered through decades. She taught me that before Elizabeth left, before everything got complicated. Elizabeth, Maxwell stood, helped Grace to her feet, started walking back toward the house. My wife, she left 5 years ago, died 6 months later. That's a story for another time. But Grace had heard enough, understood enough. This man protecting her had been left too, abandoned, judged. He knew what it cost. They walked in comfortable silence. Behind them, Coldwater Spring bubbled eternal. Ahead, the ranch house glowed warm in an afternoon light. Between them, something was building. Trust, alliance. Something more that neither was ready to name yet. Thomas leaned back, processing. You were teaching her about survival, about the land. I was teaching her how to protect herself if things went wrong, Maxwell corrected. Practical knowledge, water, cattle, winter management. He paused. But she was teaching me something bigger. What? That mercy isn't weakness. That protecting someone doesn't make you a fool. Maxwell's weathered face softened. Your great-grandmother knew I needed that lesson. She sent Grace to teach it to me. Grace appeared in the doorway as if summoned, silver hair catching lamplight. Are you telling him about the spring? Just finished. Tell him about Christmas, Grace said softly. About Catherine. About how hard the truth can be when people are grieving. Maxwell nodded. The hardest part's coming, Thomas. Where we face the whole community. Where Grace stood before people who wanted her to disappear. Where I had to choose reputation or righteousness. Thomas waited intent. Christmas Day, 1878. Maxwell continued. The day everything changed. Evening found Grace in the guest room. Mrs. Lynn had brought a dress, deep blue wool, simple but elegant, well made. Grace held it up against herself in the small mirror. This is too fine for me. Nonsense. It was Catherine's. No, Grace set the shawl down, stepped back, hands shaking. Mrs. Lynn, please understand. Tomorrow I'll walk into that chapel wearing Catherine Donovan's shawl. Everyone will know what that means. That Maxwell's claiming me, publicly, under his mother's protection. That's exactly what it means. And it will destroy him. Grace's voice rose, all the fear breaking through. Pierce will use it. Catherine will use it. The whole territory will see it as proof that I'm manipulating him, using his dead mother's memory to trap a wealthy man. Mrs. Lynn's hands stilled. She studied Grace's reflection carefully. Are you, what? Manipulating him? Trapping him? Are those accusations true? No, of course not. I came here to survive, not to. Then wear the shawl. Mrs. Lynn's voice was steel-wrapped in silk, absolute. Wear it and let them see the truth, that you're under Donovan protection because you deserve protection. That Maxwell chose to stand with you because it's right, not because you forced him. But what if I fail him? What if this costs him everything and I'm not worth it? Then you'll have tried. Mrs. Lynn picked up the shawl, draped it firmly over Grace's shoulders, and trying is more than most people ever do. Grace looked at herself in the mirror, the green wool against the blue dress, Catherine's legacy resting on her shoulders, the weight of it, the meaning. I'm terrified. Good. Mrs. Lynn began pinning hair again. Hands steady now, sure. Courage without fear is just stupidity. Courage with fear, that's strength. That's what Maxwell sees in you. That's what Catherine would have seen. Grace's breathing steadied, slowly. Tell me about her, about Catherine. Mrs. Lynn smiled. Let me tell you how I know about courage and fear. I don't belong. Not yet, but you will. Mrs. Lynn's reflection met Grace's in the mirror. Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone except Catherine and Maxwell. Grace nodded. 30 years ago, 1848, I was 19 years old, fresh married to a merchant in San Francisco. Good man, honest. We had plans, a future. Mrs. Lynn's hands slowed, memory pulling her back. Then there was a fire. Warehouse district. My husband died trying to save his goods. Died for silk and tea and nothing that mattered. Grace turned to face her. Mrs. Lynn, I'm sorry. The Chinese community couldn't support me. Too many poor themselves. We'd barely established ourselves in California. The white community, Mrs. Lynn's voice hardened. They made their feelings clear. Chinese widow, no family, no money, no value. What did you do? What you did, I walked, not 4 days, more like 4 weeks, north from San Francisco, looking for work, for shelter, for any scrap of mercy. Mrs. Lynn returned to pinning hair, but her hands trembled slightly now. I ended up in Sacramento, December, cold, starving. I collapsed outside a house in the rain, expected to die there. Grace held very still, understanding. This was the parallel, the connection, why Mrs. Lynn had defended her so fiercely. A woman found me, Catherine Donovan. She was visiting Sacramento on business, saw me lying there, brought me inside, fed me, clothed me, and when I was strong enough, she said, I need a housekeeper, someone I can trust, someone who understands what it means to survive. Maxwell's mother saved you. She did more than save me. She gave me family, purpose, dignity. Mrs. Lynn met Grace's eyes in the mirror. When she was dying 3 years ago, she made me promise something. She said, Lynn, there will come a day when someone else needs what I gave you. Help them. Help Maxwell help them. That's our legacy. Grace's throat closed. She knew. She knew her son would need reminding, would need purpose, would need to remember that strength isn't ownership, it's protection. Mrs. Lynn finished with the hair. Step back. When you collapsed at that gate, I saw myself 30 years ago, and I knew Catherine had been right. This was the moment she'd prepared us for. What if I fail you? What if I make things worse? Then you'll have tried. That's more than most people do. Mrs. Lynn handed Grace the green shawl, the one Maxwell had mentioned, his mother's. This was Catherine's favorite. Wear it tomorrow. Let them see you're under Donovan protection. Let them see you matter. Grace held the shawl, soft wool, well kept, smelling faintly of cedar and something floral. The physical embodiment of legacy, of women helping women, of mercy passed down. A legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who you raise up. Mrs. Lynn said it quiet, firm. Catherine raised Maxwell. Maxwell is raising you. Someday you'll raise someone else. That's how good survives. Through deliberate, stubborn kindness, Grace wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, felt its weight, its warmth, its meaning. Thank you, Mrs. Lynn. Don't thank me. Prove Catherine right. Show this territory that mercy matters more than scandal. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of cold that made breathing hurt. 20 below, maybe colder. Sun rose brilliant and hard over frozen landscape. Everything diamond sharp, crystalline, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The chapel sat at the edge of town, 10 miles from Maxwell's ranch. White painted wood, bell tower leaning slightly left, simple cross above the door. It was the kind of building frontier communities erected first. Before schools, before shops, before anything else. A declaration that civilization existed here, that God's presence sanctified their claim to wilderness. 25 families gathered there most Sundays, maybe 80 people total. Everyone knew everyone. Births, deaths, marriages, scandals. In a community, this small privacy didn't exist. Every choice was public, every judgment communal. Maxwell helped Grace down from the wagon. She wore the blue dress, the green shawl, her hair pinned up proper, face pale but composed. She looked dignified, respectable, everything Pierce's lawyers would claim she wasn't. Ready? Maxwell offered his arm. Grace took it. Her hand trembled. No, but let's go anyway. They walked toward the chapel entrance. Each step felt like walking into battle. Grace's stomach churned. Fear tasted metallic. But she kept moving, kept her chin up, kept her face neutral. The moment they stepped inside, conversation stopped. Not gradually, not politely, it stopped. Every head turned, every eye fixed on them. The silence was total, absolute, suffocating. Grace felt 80 stares like brands, felt judgment crystallize in real time, felt herself being measured, assessed, found wanting before anyone spoke a word. Maxwell's arm under her hand was steady, unyielding. He walked them to a pew midway up, not hiding in back, not claiming front, middle ground. Statement of belonging without arrogance. They sat. Mrs. Lynn took the seat on Grace's other side, creating a wall of protection. 3 people making a stand. The young pastor stood at the pulpit. Reverend somebody, Grace didn't catch the name. 20-something, nervous. He fumbled his Bible, dropped his notes, recovered badly. He could feel the tension. Everyone could. The room vibrated with it. His sermon was about Christmas mercy, about shepherds and angels and unlikely messengers of grace. The words should have been beautiful, should have meant something, but they fell flat against the wall of communal hostility filling every pew. Grace sat rigid, hands clasped, knuckles white. She didn't hear the sermon, could only hear her own heartbeat, could only feel the weight of judgment pressing down like physical force. After the service, people approached Maxwell, careful, formal, shook his hand, wished him Merry Christmas, and every single one of them ignored Grace completely, as if she didn't exist, as if she was invisible, all except one. An old woman, 70 if she was a day, sharp eyes, sharper tongue. She studied Grace for a long moment, then nodded, once. Acknowledgement. Merry Christmas, dear. 2 words, simple, but they landed like benediction. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Porter, Grace managed. The old woman moved on, but those 2 words hung there, proof that kindness still existed, small, fragile, but real. Then Catherine Bradford appeared. She was 49, widow, well-dressed, face hard as Montana stone. She positioned herself directly in Grace's path, blocked the exit, voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Some people have no shame, imposing on decent society. Grace froze. Maxwell stepped forward, but Catherine wasn't done. Taking advantage of a kind man's charity. Typical. That's enough, Mrs. Bradford. Maxwell's voice was firm. Is it? Catherine's eyes blazed, not with malice exactly, with something deeper. Pain, grief, rage that had nowhere else to go. This woman appears out of nowhere, Tiki, attaches herself to the wealthiest bachelor in the territory, and we're supposed to believe it's innocent. Mrs. Thornton is recovering from exposure. I offered shelter. That's all. She's the widow of the man who killed my son. Catherine's voice cracked. Raw. Real. Did she tell you that? Did she mention Daniel Thornton shot my Timothy? The room went silent. Total silence. Every ear listening. Every eye watching. Grace couldn't breathe. Hadn't known. Hadn't been told the names. Just knew Daniel had killed one robber. Never asked who. Never wanted to know. Timothy was 24 years old. Catherine's face twisted. Grief and anger indistinguishable. Just a boy. Made mistakes. But your husband shot him twice. Left him to die. Mrs. Bradford. Maxwell's voice cut through, sharp. Your son was robbing a bank, holding hostages. 2 of them children. Deputy Thornton did his job. His job was murder. His job was protection. Grace found her voice, small but steady. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Bradford. I am, but my husband didn't want to shoot anyone. He wanted to save innocent people. Innocent, Catherine spat the word. And what about my son? Your son made choices, hard choices, wrong choices. My husband made different ones. Grace's voice grew stronger. I grieve for Daniel. You grieve for Timothy. Both those things can be true, but I won't carry your son's choices as my shame. The words hung in cold air, truth spoken plain. No apology, no submission, just fact. Catherine stared at Grace. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe. She'd expected tears, expected submission, expected Grace to crumble. Instead, Grace stood straight, met her eyes, refused to bend. Catherine turned and left, swept out with 3 other women following. The crowd parted for her, reformed behind her. Whispers began, building, growing. Maxwell guided Grace toward the door. Mrs. Lynn followed. They walked through watching eyes, through judgment, through the first battle of what would be a long war. The wagon ride home was silent. Grace stared at her hands, processing, understanding. Catherine Bradford had a reason for hatred, a good reason, a real one. That made everything more complicated, more difficult, more human. You did well. Maxwell broke the silence finally. I called her son a criminal to her face. You told the truth. There's a difference, Rudababo. Grace looked at him, really looked, saw the toll this was taking, the cost of standing with her. Maxwell, this is only going to get worse. When Pierce's lawyers find out about Catherine, about Timothy, they'll use it. Let them. You can't protect me from everything. No, but I can protect you from this, from judgment that has no basis in truth. Maxwell's jaw set. Determined. Catherine's grief is real, but it doesn't make you guilty. Grace wanted to believe him, wanted to believe truth mattered, that justice existed, that doing right would be enough. But she'd learned the hard way. The world didn't work that way. Truth was negotiable. Justice was expensive. And doing right often cost everything. Still, she was here, alive, protected. That was more than she'd had a week ago. It would have to be enough. They crested the hill overlooking Maxwell's ranch. Smoke rose from the chimney, cattle bunched near the windbreak. Everything looked peaceful, ordered, safe. But Grace knew better now. New storms were coming, legal storms, social storms, storms that would test them both beyond anything they'd faced so far. Tomorrow we start preparing, Maxwell said, reading her thoughts. We gather evidence, build our case, prove Pierce is lying. And if we can't prove it, Maxwell looked at her, eyes steady, voice certain. Then we lose. But we lose standing up, together. Grace nodded. It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was solidarity. And right now, that mattered more than promises of victory. They rode down toward the house, toward Christmas dinner and temporary peace, toward the calm before the coming storm. Behind them, snow began to fall again, soft, quiet, covering tracks, hiding evidence. Montana winter bearing everything under layers of white, but underneath the land remained, solid, enduring, waiting to see who would survive to claim it. Maxwell stood, poured fresh coffee from the pot. The study fire had burned low again. Outside present-day Montana snow fell exactly as it had 26 years before. Catherine Bradford, Thomas said carefully. She had reason to hate Grandmother Grace. She had reason to grieve, Maxwell corrected. Her son died. That's real loss, real pain. Doesn't matter that Timothy chose crime. A mother's love doesn't stop because her child makes wrong choices. So she wasn't wrong. She wasn't wrong to grieve. She was wrong to blame Grace for Timothy's decisions. Wrong to make Grace carry the weight of her son's choices. Maxwell returned to his chair. Anger needs a target. Catherine chose the wrong one. I understood why. Didn't make it right, just made it human. Thomas thought about that. What came next was the real test, Maxwell said. The legal battle, Franklin Pierce trying to take my land, using Grace as his weapon. His voice hardened, and my mother's wisdom reaching across death to save us both. The letter. The letter, Maxwell confirmed. Now let me tell you about Catherine's prophecy, about the moment we realized nothing was accident. Christmas night settled over the ranch like a benediction. The day had been long, exhausting. The chapel confrontation had drained them both. Now Grace sat in the guest room, staring out at stars brilliant against black sky. Montana stretched endless below, cold, beautiful, indifferent to human drama. She should sleep. Her body needed rest. The frostbite still hurt. The walking still ached in every muscle. But her mind wouldn't quiet. Catherine Bradford's face kept appearing. That raw grief, that justified rage. Timothy had been someone's son, someone's child, dead at 24 because of choices he'd made and consequences he'd faced. Grace understood grief, knew its weight, its permanence. But she also understood justice. Daniel had saved 4 lives, 2 children who went home to their mothers that night. That had to matter, had to count for something. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Maxwell's voice came through the door, quiet, respectful. Grace, are you awake? Yes, come in. He entered, still dressed, hadn't gone to bed either, carried 2 coffee cups, steam rising. He handed her one, sat in the chair by the window. Both of them looking out at darkness rather than at each other. Easier that way somehow. Can't sleep either. Grace wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Too much thinking. Maxwell was quiet for a moment, then, I need to tell you something. About Elizabeth. About why I understand what Cedar Falls did to you. Grace waited. Let him find the words in his own time. I told you she left, that she died, but I didn't tell you the whole truth. Maxwell's voice was careful, measured, like he was walking through a minefield of memory. We married in 1862. I was 30. She was 24. Beautiful, educated, from Virginia. Her family had money before the war, lost most of it after. The war divided us from the start. Her family sided with the Confederacy. I couldn't, wouldn't. Montana Territory stayed Union. I stayed with it. That gap between us, it never closed. Grace sipped her coffee. Let him continue. Elizabeth hated it here. The cold, the isolation, the work. She wanted Denver, wanted society, wanted anything except ranch life. Maxwell's hands tightened on his cup. For 10 years we grew apart. Silent meals, separate lives, married in name only. What happened? 1873, I came in from checking fence line, found a note on the kitchen table. Maxwell's voice went flat, the tone people used when feeling hurt too much. It said, I can't breathe here anymore. Don't look for me. Grace drew in a sharp breath. She ran off with a traveling merchant, Thomas Whitfield, Denver man, passing through selling dry goods. She'd been meeting him for weeks, planning, packing, choosing him over everything we'd built. Maxwell, I'm sorry. 6 months later, word came. Wagon accident in Wyoming Territory. Both dead. Whitfield's wagon went off a mountain road during a storm. They died together, doing what they wanted, going where they wanted, free of me. The bitterness in his voice was old, worn smooth by years, but still present, still painful. I brought her body home, buried her proper. Stone marker, all the dignities she'd denied our marriage. Maxwell finally looked at Grace. And the town lied for me. Everyone knew the truth. Woman doesn't disappear for 6 months with fever. But they said it anyway. Said Elizabeth died of consumption. Said it to protect my pride. Understanding dawned on Grace. They controlled the narrative. Exactly. They decided how I was allowed to grieve, what story I was allowed to tell. They made me complicit in a lie because they thought it was kinder than truth. Maxwell's voice hardened, but I didn't want their pity disguised as propriety. I wanted honesty. I wanted to grieve the real loss, not the sanitized version they preferred. That's why you understood what Cedar Falls did to me. That's why they controlled your grief just like people controlled mine. Decided you were mourning wrong. Judged you for not performing suffering the way they wanted. Maxwell leaned forward, intent. Grace, when Pierce's lawyers come after us, they'll use Elizabeth. They'll call me abandoned husband. They'll question my judgment. They'll say I'm vulnerable to scheming women. Are they wrong? Grace asked it quiet. Not accusation, just question. About you, yes. About me being vulnerable. Maxwell considered. Maybe. I was alone a long time. Closed off, forgot what my mother tried to teach me about mercy and protection and what actually matters. He met her eyes. Then you showed up at my gate half dead, and I remembered. Grace felt something shift in her chest, some wall cracking. You're risking everything for someone you barely know. I know enough. I know you're brave. I know you're honest. I know you've survived things that would break most people. Maxwell's voice went soft, gentle. And I know I'd rather face Pierce's lawyers with you beside me than face another empty year alone. The words hung between them, more than alliance, more than strategy. Something neither was quite ready to name, but both recognized. Thank you for telling me about Elizabeth. Thank you for listening. Maxwell stood. We should try to sleep. Tomorrow brings its own challenges. After he left, Grace sat holding her cooling coffee, looking out at stars, thinking about two wounded people finding each other in wilderness, about truth and lies and the cost of both. Outside, snow began falling again, soft, endless, covering everything. December 26th arrived with brittle cold and hard clarity, the kind of morning where everything felt sharp-edged and fragile. Maxwell was in the barn checking stock when he heard a horse approaching. Single rider, moving slow, not threatening but deliberate. Jackson Mercer. Maxwell set down his pitchfork, walked to the barn door, waited. Jackson rode up alone this time. No ranch hands, no backup, just one man coming to talk. Maxwell. Jackson dismounted, stiff, like the ride had cost him something. Can we talk? Really talk this time? Inside, coffee's on. They didn't go to the barn office. Maxwell led him to the house, to the kitchen where Mrs. Lynn was kneading bread and Grace was learning to crack ice off frozen laundry. Domestic scene, peaceful, real. Grace looked up, saw Jackson. Tension filled her face. It's all right, Maxwell said. Jackson, this is Grace Thornton. Grace Jackson Mercer. My neighbor. Jackson removed his hat, held it awkward. Mrs. Thornton, I apologize for yesterday, for how I spoke about you. Grace studied him, surprised. You're apologizing. I am. I was wrong. Jackson looked at Maxwell, then back to Grace. Can we all sit? What I need to say, it's not easy. Mrs. Lynn poured coffee. They gathered around the kitchen table, 4 people at a crossroads. Jackson held his cup but didn't drink, just stared into it like it held answers. 26 years ago, he began finally, I was 25, arrogant, stupid, in love with a woman named Sarah Miller. Maxwell went still. In 20 years of knowing Jackson, he'd never heard this story. Sarah was poor, daughter of a ranch hand, no money, no prospects, no social standing. Jackson's voice was thick with old pain. But I didn't care. I loved her, wanted to marry her, build a life together. What happened? Grace asked softly. My father happened. He was wealthy, powerful. He threatened to disown me if I married beneath our station. Said it would ruin the family name, destroy our standing. Jackson's hands tightened on the cup. The community agreed with him. Everyone had opinions. Everyone pressured me. Told me I was throwing my life away for a poor girl. What did you do? Maxwell already knew. Could see it in Jackson's face. I was weak, young, wanted my father's approval more than I wanted to be a man of honor. Jackson's voice cracked. I told Sarah we had to wait. Wait until my father calmed down. Wait until things settled. Wait. The room was silent except for fire crackling and clock ticking. Sarah waited 6 months, endured whispers, insults, people calling her gold digger, social climber, woman trying to trap a rich man. Jackson set his cup down, hands shaking. She endured it for me, believed I'd eventually stand up for her, for us. And did you? Grace's voice was barely above whisper. No, the word was confession, condemnation. October 1852, Sarah drowned herself in Miller Creek, left a note. It said, I can't be the reason you lose your family. I love you too much to watch you suffer for loving me. Grace's hand went to her mouth. Maxwell closed his eyes, the weight of it, the tragedy, the waste. I found her body. Jackson's voice was hollow, empty. I was the one who pulled her from that creek, cold, blue, dead because I was too much of a coward to stand against my father. Jackson. Maxwell's voice was rough. My father died 3 months later. Heart attack. I inherited everything. The money, the land, all of it. Too late to matter. Too late to bring her back. Jackson looked up, eyes wet. I married Eleanor a year later. She knew the whole story. Married me anyway. God knows why. I've spent 26 years trying to atone for 6 months of cowardice. Why are you telling us this? Grace asked. Because yesterday at that chapel, I watched as you stand up to Catherine Bradford. Watched you refuse to apologize for surviving. Watched Maxwell risk everything to protect you. Jackson's voice steadied, strengthened. And I saw my second chance, the chance I didn't take with Sarah. Maxwell leaned forward. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm testifying at your hearing. I'll stand witness to your character, to Mrs. Thornton's character, to the truth of what's happening here. Jackson met Maxwell's eyes. Pierce is using scandal to steal land, using cruelty disguised as morality. I won't stand by and watch it happen again. Not again. Grace reached across the table. set her hand on Jackson's. Thank you. That means more than you know. It doesn't undo what I did to Sarah. Doesn't bring her back, but maybe, Jackson's voice broke. Maybe it means something that I finally learned the lesson. 26 years too late. A legacy isn't what you leave behind. Maxwell said it quiet. His mother's words. Wisdom earned through suffering. It's who you raise up, who you protect, who you stand with when standing costs something. You're doing that now, Jackson. That matters. Jackson nodded. Couldn't speak. Just nodded. Mrs. Lynn refilled coffee cups. The kitchen was warm, safe. 4 people who understood loss in different forms, who knew the cost of choices made and not made, who were choosing finally to stand together. Eleanor and I will travel to Virginia City with you. Jackson found his voice again. United front, show Judge Morrison that respectable people support you. Pierce won't like that. Good. Let him be uncomfortable for once. Jackson's jaw set, determined. I've spent 26 years being comfortable, being safe, protecting my reputation. Sarah died for my comfort. I won't let anyone else pay that price. After Jackson left, Grace stood at the window watching him ride away. Maxwell came to stand beside her. He loved her. Grace's voice was soft. Sarah, he really loved her. He did, still does. Some loves don't end, they just become scars. Like Daniel, Grace turned to face him. I'll always love Daniel. Part of me will always grieve what we lost. I know. Maxwell's voice was gentle, understanding. I'll always remember Elizabeth. Not with love anymore, but with awareness of what went wrong. What I could have done different. Does that bother you that I still love Daniel? No. Maxwell was quiet for a moment. Then love isn't finite. You loving Daniel doesn't mean you can't love again. Differently. Someone else. The words hung there, unspoken meaning. Possibility. Grace didn't answer. Not yet. Too soon. Too complicated. But she didn't look away either. In the present, Grace re-entered the study carrying a tray with warm gingerbread. The smell filled the room. Jackson Mercer died 5 years ago, she said to Thomas. He and Eleanor both. They lived good lives after that Christmas, helped dozens of people, built schools, funded churches. Her voice was gentle. Spent 20 years trying to make up for 6 months of cowardice. Did it work? Thomas asked. The atonement. Did he forgive himself? Grace and Maxwell exchanged glances, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. I think he came close, Grace said finally. Eleanor told me that before Jackson died, he said he'd finally earned Sarah's forgiveness. Whether that was true or just what he needed to believe. She set down the tray. It gave him peace. That's what matters. Why didn't he stand up for Sarah when it mattered? Because he was 25, Maxwell said. Because his father controlled everything. Because he thought he had time. The old man's voice carried weight earned through decades. That's the lesson, boy. You never have as much time as you think. When the moment comes to stand or run, you stand. Because running haunts you forever. Is that why you stood for Grandmother Grace? Exactly why. Maxwell looked at his wife. Some chances don't come twice. I knew that. So I stood. That afternoon, Grace was helping Mrs. Lynn in the guest room, packing for the trip to Virginia City. 3 days travel, need warm clothes, practical things. Grace's old coat lay across the bed, the one she'd nearly died in. Mrs. Lynn was examining it for salvageable fabric. Nothing here worth keeping, Mrs. Lynn said, but check the pockets. Sometimes we forget things. Grace reached into the deep pocket, felt paper, drew it out. The note from Reverend Hayes. She'd clutched it for 4 days, nearly died holding it. She unfolded it carefully, then stopped. The paper was thicker than she remembered. She looked closer. 2 sheets, folded together. She'd only read the first page. The second page had different handwriting. Older, more feminine, dated September 1875. Grace's hands shook as she read. The letter was from Catherine Donovan to Reverend William Hayes, written 3 years before Catherine died, 3 years before Grace ever left Cedar Falls. A letter of instruction, of prophecy, of a mother preparing for what her son would need. Grace read it once, twice, then called out, "Maxwell, Mrs. Lynn, you need to see this." They gathered in the guest room. Grace handed Maxwell the second page, watched his face change as he read, watched understanding dawn, watched his mother's voice reach across death to shape the present. Maxwell read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "Dear William, if you're reading this, I've passed on. My son, Maxwell, runs the ranch alone now. Elizabeth was wrong for him. I saw it on their wedding day, but said nothing. Now he suffers that silence. Maxwell is strong but wounded. He's closed himself off, forgotten what mother taught him. Strength is protecting others, especially those society abandons. 30 years ago, I saved a Chinese woman named Lynn. She was dying outside my door. I gave her home family purpose. It was the best thing I ever did." Maxwell paused, looked at Mrs. Lynn. She was crying silently. He continued reading. "William, you're a good pastor. You'll see injustice in your church. When you do, especially if it's a woman the world has given up on, send her to my son. Tell him I asked. He won't refuse. Not if he remembers who he is. Help him remember William. He needs someone to save so he can save himself. Catherine Donovan." Below Catherine's letter, Reverend Hayes had added his own note. "Mrs. Thornton, Mrs. Donovan wrote this 3 years before she died. I've carried it since waiting. When I saw what Cedar Falls did to you, I knew you were the one she meant. Her son Maxwell is everything she said. Go to him. Tell him his mother sent you." Maxwell set the letter down. His hands weren't steady. His eyes were wet. He looked at Grace, at Mrs. Lynn, at the evidence of his mother's foresight, her love, her planning. She knew. His voice broke. "Before Elizabeth left. Before everything. She knew I'd need this. Need you." Grace couldn't speak. Could only stand there holding the proof that her arrival wasn't accident, wasn't chance. Was destiny prepared by a woman 3 years dead who understood her son better than he understood himself. Mrs. Lynn moved first, wrapped her arms around Maxwell, then around Grace, pulled them both close. 3 people bound by Catherine Donovan's wisdom, by her love, by her understanding that protection was the highest calling. "She saved me so you could save Grace." Mrs. Lynn's voice was muffled against Maxwell's shoulder. "She planned it all, knew it all, even when she didn't know the specifics. The land teaches patience, people teach you mercy. Both are needed to survive." Maxwell said it soft, his mother's words. Another lesson, another truth. "She taught me patience through ranching. Now Grace is teaching me mercy through survival." Grace looked up at him. "I'm not teaching you anything you already knew." "No, I'd forgotten. You reminded me." Maxwell pulled back, held Grace at arm's length. "My mother sent you to me, across 3 years and 4 days of walking and near death. That means something." "What does it mean?" "It means we were always meant to find each other, meant to stand together, meant to fight Pierce and the whole damn territory if necessary." Maxwell's voice grew stronger, more certain. "It means we go to that hearing with truth on our side, and truth is the strongest weapon there is." Grace held the letter against her chest, felt its weight, its meaning, its power. Tomorrow they'd leave for Virginia City. Tomorrow the real fight began. But tonight they had this, proof that Catherine Donovan had seen further than any of them, had prepared the ground, had planted seeds that were now bearing fruit. "Thank you, Catherine," Grace whispered to the woman she'd never met, to the ghost who'd saved her life from beyond the grave. "Thank you for your son." The days between December 26th and their departure blurred together in preparation. Maxwell transformed his study into headquarters for their defense. Documents spread across every surface, survey maps pinned to walls, cattle records stacked in careful chronological order. Everything that proved his 11 years of continuous water use. Grace helped organize. Her education showed in how she read legal language, how she understood property law, how she asked questions that sharpened their strategy. "Pierce's argument rests on prior appropriation," she said, studying the Montana Water Code. "He claims his survey proves the spring originates on his land. But my survey came first, recorded first, used first." Maxwell tapped his 1867 documents. That's what prior appropriation means. First in time, first in right. His lawyers will argue your survey was inaccurate. Then we prove it wasn't. Territorial surveyor's signature. Official seal. Registration number that matches territorial records. Maxwell's jaw set. Truth is our weapon. We just have to make Judge Morrison see it. They practiced testimony. Maxwell drilling Grace on what to expect, how to answer hostile questions, how to stay calm when Pierce's lawyers tried to anger him. They'll bring up Daniel, he said to Timothy, your pregnancy, everything painful. Grace's hands tightened on her coffee cup. I know. You need to stay dignified. Let truth speak itself. Don't get defensive. Don't apologize. Maxwell's voice was gentle but firm. You did nothing wrong. Remember that. And if they make me angry, then take a breath, count to 3, answer the question you wish they'd asked, not the one they did. He smiled slightly. Lawyers hate that. By January 8th, everything was ready. Documents boxed, testimony practiced, strategy clear. All that remained was the journey. They loaded 2 wagons on January 10th. Maxwell Grace and Mrs. Lynn in the first. Jackson and Eleanor Mercer in the second. 5 people heading to Virginia City to face a man who owned half the territory and wanted more. The journey took 3 cold days. The first day they made 30 miles. Stopped at a way station where suspicious eyes watched Grace. Whispers followed them. But Jackson and Eleanor's presence provided protection. Respectability. The Mercers were known. Respected. Their support meant something. That night around the fire, Eleanor sat beside Grace. You're braver than you know. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. Brave people usually do. Eleanor smiled. Cowards don't shake. They run. You're shaking and staying. That's courage. The second day brought harder travel. Snow deepened. Wind picked up. They made only 25 miles before stopping. But spirits stayed high. Jackson told stories of early territorial days, but Lynn shared tales of Catherine Donovan's battles against injustice. Grace listened and felt less alone. The third day, Virginia City appeared on the horizon. 3,000 people. Brick buildings, actual streets. The courthouse stood at the center, imposing, the place where their fate would be decided. They checked into the territorial hotel. 2 rooms, Grace and Mrs. Lynn in one, Maxwell Jackson and Eleanor in the other. Everything proper, respectable. No ammunition for Pierce's lawyers. That evening, they reviewed strategy one final time in Maxwell's room. Pierce will attack your character, Jackson said. Make you look like a fool taken in by a scheming woman. Then we show the judge what Grace really is, Maxwell replied. A widow who survived cruelty. Nothing more, nothing less. And the water rights. 11 years of documented use, professional survey, everything legal and recorded. Pierce's documents are forgeries. We just have to prove it. After the meeting ended, Grace stood at her hotel window. Couldn't sleep. Tomorrow would determine everything. Her future, Maxwell's future, whether Mercy had a place in Montana territory. She thought of Daniel. Would he approve? Would he understand? I think you would, she whispered. I think you'd want me to fight. Across the hall, Maxwell sat at his desk, reviewing documents one last time, making sure nothing was forgotten, nothing overlooked. His mother's letter lay on top, Catherine's words reaching across death. Help him remember who he is. I remember Mama, Maxwell said quietly. Grace reminded me. Now I just have to prove it. Outside Virginia City settled into night. Tomorrow would bring battle. Tonight brought preparation. And 5 people who'd stood together gathered their courage for the fight ahead. The old man's voice paused. The fire in the study had burned low again. Thomas sat forward, completely absorbed. The story had him. All of it. The tragedy. The hope. The complexity of real human lives. Great-grandmother Catherine knew all along. Thomas's voice was awed. She knew I'd need purpose. Maxwell shifted in his chair. 72 years old now. The man in the story 46 and fighting for his land. She knew I'd closed myself off after Elizabeth. Knew I needed something bigger than myself to care about. And Grandmother Grace was that something. She is. Maxwell smiled, soft, full of memory. But first we had to survive Pierce, had to prove ourselves to the territory, had to show that mercy was stronger than scandal. The hearing, Thomas said. Tell me about the hearing. Patience, boy. That's where the story tests itself, where everything mattered. Maxwell reached for his cold coffee. January 10th, 1879. We loaded 2 wagons, me, Grace, Mrs. Lynn Jackson, and Eleanor Mercer. 5 people heading to Virginia City to face a man who owned half the territory and wanted more. The journey took 3 days. Cold, hard, but traveling with company made it bearable. They stopped at way stations, shared meals around fires, talked strategy and law and what they'd face. Jackson brought documentation, property records, old letters from Catherine to territorial officials, proof of community standing. Eleanor brought social weight, respectability, the kind that mattered in courtrooms where perception often trumped evidence. Grace rode in the wagon wrapped in blankets, watching Montana pass, thinking about what was coming. Catherine Bradford would be there, would testify, would paint Daniel as murderer and Grace as opportunist. Pierce's lawyers would twist everything, make ugliness look like truth. But they also had truth, real truth. Catherine's letter, 11 years of documented water use, character witnesses who mattered. It would be enough, had to be enough. Virginia City appeared on the 3rd day, territorial capital. Bigger than anything Grace had seen in Montana. 3,000 people, brick buildings, actual streets. The courthouse stood at the center. Solid, imposing, the place where justice theoretically lived. They checked into a hotel, 2 rooms, Grace and Mrs. Lynn in one, Maxwell Jackson and Eleanor in another. Proper, respectable, no ammunition for Pierce's lawyers. The hearing was set for 9 the next morning. They spent the evening preparing. Reviewing testimony, organizing documents, Maxwell drilled Grace on what to expect, how to answer, what to avoid. They'll try to make you angry, he said. They'll bring up Daniel, Timothy, your pregnancy, everything painful. You need to stay calm, dignified. Let truth speak for itself. I'll try. That's all anyone can do. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She stood at the hotel window looking out at Virginia City. Lamplight and darkness. Civilization carved from wilderness. Everything temporary. Everything built on hope and law, in the belief that order mattered. Tomorrow would determine her future, Maxwell's future. Whether mercy had a place in Montana, or whether cruelty dressed as morality would win. She thought of Daniel, of the man he'd been, brave, honest, willing to die for strangers. Would he be proud of her? Would he understand what she'd done, walking 4 days? Accepting Maxwell's help. Standing here now, ready to fight. I hope so, she whispered to his ghost. To the memory. I hope you'd understand. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, standing room only. Land disputes drew crowds. Entertainment and education combined. See how justice worked. See who won and who lost. See the machinery of law grind through human lives. Judge Morrison sat at the bench, 62 years old, hard face, sharp eyes. He'd presided over Montana territory for 15 years, seen everything, believed nothing without proof. Rumor said he took bribes. Maxwell hoped rumor was wrong. Pierce's lawyer sat at one table, 2 Denver attorneys in expensive suits, polished, professional, the kind who charged by the hour and earned every penny through ruthless efficiency. Maxwell sat at the other table, alone, couldn't afford a lawyer, representing himself. Frontier justice. Do it yourself or don't do it at all. Grace sat in the front row, Mrs. Lynn beside her, Jackson and Eleanor behind them. United front, visible support. The judge banged his gavel. Case of Franklin Pierce versus Maxwell Donovan. Water Rights Dispute Section 22 Montana Territory. Mr. Harrison, you may proceed. Pierce's lead attorney stood, tall, gray hair, voice like honey over steel. Your Honor, this is a simple case of property law. My client, Franklin Pierce, owns Sections 14 and 15. Survey documents from 1865 clearly show Coldwater Spring originates on Section 15 and flows onto Section 22. Under prior appropriation doctrine, whoever controls the source controls the rights. He presented documents, survey maps, professional looking, official seals, everything perfect, everything probably fake. Furthermore, Your Honor, we question Mr. Donovan's fitness to hold homestead. The Homestead Act requires good moral character. Mr. Donovan currently harbors an unrelated woman of questionable reputation. This calls into question his judgment and moral standing. Maxwell's jaw tightened. Here it came. We call Catherine Bradford to testify. Catherine took the stand, sworn in. She looked tired, worn, but determined. She'd come to tell her truth, her pain. Mrs. Bradford, you know Grace Thornton. I know of her. She's married to the man who killed my son. Your son, Timothy, age 24, shot by Deputy Daniel Thornton during a bank robbery. Is that correct? Yes. And Mrs. Thornton is now living unchaperoned with Maxwell Donovan. So I'm told. Does that seem appropriate to you? Catherine looked at Grace, something complicated in her expression. No, it seems suspicious. Maxwell leaned forward, whispered to himself. This is wrong, all wrong. The lawyer continued. Mrs. Bradford was your son armed during the robbery. Catherine hesitated. Long moment. Then yes. So Deputy Thornton was responding to an armed robbery, correct? Yes, but Timothy was young, scared. He didn't deserve. Thank you, Mrs. Bradford. That's all. The lawyer sat, looking satisfied. They'd established Grace's connection to violence, to tragedy, to scandal. Exactly what they wanted. Judge Morrison looked at Maxwell. Your witness, Mr. Donovan. Maxwell stood, approached Catherine, spoke gently, respectfully. Mrs. Bradford, I'm sorry for your loss, truly. A mother shouldn't outlive her son. Catherine's eyes filled. Thank you. But Mrs. Thornton didn't pull that trigger, didn't rob that bank, didn't put your son in danger. She's a widow, like you, grieving like you. Why does her grief offend you when yours doesn't? Catherine opened her mouth, closed it, no answer. That's all. Maxwell returned to his seat. Next came Maxwell's evidence. Survey maps from 1867 and 68, both showing Coldwater Spring clearly on Section 22, signed by territorial surveyors. Official seals, documentation of 11 years continuous use, cattle records, water measurements, everything proving prior appropriation. Pierce's lawyer objected. These surveys contradict our 1865 documentation. Because your documentation is fake, Maxwell said flatly. There was no territorial surveyor in this region in 1865. That area wasn't even mapped yet. Your documents are forgeries bought to steal my water. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Donovan. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Can you prove it? I can prove my documents are legitimate. Territorial office will verify. Maxwell held up his papers. These have registration numbers, filed dates, witness signatures. Check them. The judge examined both sets of documents. His expression shifted, hardened. He looked at Pierce's lawyer. These registration numbers don't match territorial records I can access. Your Honor, I'm sure there's an explanation. I'm sure there is too, and we'll explore it, but not today. The judge set the papers aside. Continue, Mr. Donovan. Maxwell called Jackson Mercer to testify. Jackson spoke about Maxwell's character, his honesty, his work ethic, his care for the land and community. Strong testimony, believable. Then Eleanor testified about Grace's dignity, her suffering, the injustice of Cedar Falls, how protecting a widow demonstrated moral strength, not weakness. Finally, Maxwell called Grace. She took the stand, hands shaking but voice steady, wearing the blue dress, the green shawl, looking respectable, dignified, exactly what Pierce's lawyers claimed she wasn't. Mrs. Thornton, Maxwell said gently, tell the court how you came to my ranch. Grace told her story, all of it. Daniel's death, the town's cruelty, her stillborn daughter, the 4-day walk, nearly dying. Maxwell's mercy. The courtroom was silent, absolutely silent. People leaning forward, listening, hearing real suffering, real survival, real courage. Did you come to Montana Territory to seduce Mr. Donovan? No, I came to survive. Did you ever behave inappropriately with Mr. Donovan? Never. He's been nothing but honorable. Why are you here today? Grace looked at the judge, at the crowd, at Catherine Bradford. Because truth matters. Because Maxwell Donovan is a good man being punished for doing what's right. Because if helping desperate people makes a man unfit for homestead, then Montana Territory deserves to stay wilderness. The words hit hard, true, unavoidable. Maxwell returned to his table, picked up Catherine's letter, the second page, the prophecy. Your Honor, I'd like to submit one more piece of evidence, a letter from my mother, Catherine Donovan, written 3 years before she died, written to Reverend William Hayes of Cedar Falls, predicting this moment, preparing for it. He read the letter aloud, Catherine's words filling the courtroom, her wisdom, her foresight, her understanding that her son would need purpose beyond property. When he finished, silence. Then Judge Morrison spoke. Mr. Donovan, your mother was a remarkable woman. She was your honor. The judge studied the documents again, studied Grace, studied Maxwell, studied everything presented. Finally, he spoke. I've seen enough. Mr. Donovan's water rights are legitimate and well documented. Mr. Pierce's claims are based on questionable evidence that will be investigated for fraud. Water rights remain with Mr. Donovan. Maxwell's breath left him in a rush. Furthermore, Mr. Donovan's character is beyond reproach. Offering shelter to a widow demonstrates moral strength, not weakness. The objections based on Mrs. Thornton's presence are without merit and dismissed. The gavel came down. Final, absolute. Case closed. Mr. Donovan keeps his water. Mr. Pierce, you'll pay Mr. Donovan's travel costs. And if I find evidence of forged documents, there will be additional consequences. Court adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Applause. Voices. Maxwell sat stunned. They'd won. Actually won. Grace was there. Suddenly, beside him, crying. We did it. Maxwell, we did it. You did it. Your testimony, your courage. He stood, pulled her into a hug. Proper, brief, but real. Thank you. Jackson clapped Maxwell's shoulder. Eleanor hugged Grace. Mrs. Lynn stood apart, crying with relief. 5 people who had stood together, who'd won together. Pierce's lawyers packed their papers, faces hard. Pierce himself sat in the back row, furious, defeated. He tried to steal Maxwell's land through scandal and lies, failed at both. Outside the courthouse, winter sun felt warm. Victory felt warmer. Maxwell looked at the mountains, at the vast Montana sky. I chose right, he said quietly, never regretted it. Grace smiled, first real smile since Christmas. Me neither. The journey home took 3 days, light days, happy days, the weight lifted, fear gone, future open again. They reached Maxwell's ranch on February 1st. Spring thaw starting, icicles dripping, snow receding, hope visible in the land itself. That evening, Maxwell found Grace on the porch, watching sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. She stood wrapped in Catherine's shawl, looking peaceful, settled. Grace, he came to stand beside her. Can we talk? Of course. Maxwell was quiet for a long moment, finding words, finding courage. When you came here 2 months ago, I thought I was rescuing you. You were. No, you rescued me. He turned to face her fully. You reminded me what matters. Purpose, partnership, standing for something beyond property. Grace waited, sensing what was coming. I'm 46 years old, set in my ways, married to this land in ways that destroyed my first marriage. I'm not easy. I'm not simple. I'm stubborn and solitary, and half the time I prefer cattle to people. Maxwell, but Grace, he took her hands, gentle, careful. I love you. I love your courage, your honesty, your strength. You make me want to be the man my mother raised, the man who protects and provides and stands against the world when necessary. Grace's breath caught. I'm asking you to marry me, not out of duty, not obligation, but because I love you, because you make me better, because I want to build a legacy together. He produced a ring from his pocket, simple gold band, small sapphire. My mother's. She wanted her daughter-in-law to have it. Grace looked at the ring, at Maxwell. At the future, he offered. I love Daniel. Her voice was steady, clear. Part of me always will. I know. But I love you too. Differently, but real. Tears slid down her face. You gave me more than shelter. You gave me back my dignity, my worth, my belief that good people still exist. Is that a yes? Yes, Maxwell, I'll marry you. He slid the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, like Catherine had known, had prepared even this. They kissed, gentle, careful, full of promise and hope, and the beginning of something neither had expected but both desperately needed. Inside, Mrs. Lynn watched through the window, crying, smiling, Catherine's legacy fulfilled. The frozen widow had found more than shelter. She'd found home, and the lonely rancher had found more than purpose. He'd found love. Montana stretched vast around them, cold, beautiful, indifferent. But on that porch, two people chose warmth, chose each other, chose to believe that mercy was always worth the risk, always. The wedding came in August, small chapel ceremony, Reverend Hayes officiating. He'd traveled from Cedar Falls specifically. Joy on his face. His plan, Catherine's plan, had worked. Jackson walked Grace down the aisle. Eleanor and Mrs. Lynn stood as witnesses. 30 community members attended. Genuine celebration. Even some former critics came, watching, witnessing, accepting finally that Grace belonged. Catherine Bradford didn't attend, never reconciled, carried her grief and anger to her grave 5 years later. Some wounds didn't heal, some losses couldn't be forgiven. That was human, sad, but human. Grace wore a cream-colored dress, simple, beautiful. Maxwell wore his best suit. They spoke traditional vows, words worn smooth by generations, but meaning everything in their specific mouths. In sorrow, and joy, sickness, and health until death. They meant it, both of them. The reception was at the ranch. Music, dancing, food. Mrs. Lynn outdid herself. People laughed. Celebrated. Two wounded people choosing life together. Choosing hope after loss. It deserves celebration. Grace and Maxwell danced, awkward, unpracticed, perfect. Happy, Maxwell asked. Happier than I thought possible. Grace looked up at him. Thank you for standing at that gate. Thank you for being worth standing for. The old man's voice faded. The fire was embers now. Thomas sat with tears on his face. Not ashamed, just moved. That was 1879, Thomas said. 26 years ago. 26 years. Maxwell looked at the window, at snow falling, at the ranch that had survived. We've had good years, hard years, lost some cattle, gained some land, built a life. And Grandmother Grace, still the strongest person I know. Maxwell smiled, still teaching me mercy every day. The door opened. Grace entered, 60 years old now, silver in her hair, face lined by time and weather, still beautiful, still strong. She carried a tray of fresh coffee, set it down, sat beside Maxwell, took his hand with automatic ease. 26 years of marriage in that gesture. You told him the story, she said. I did. Grace looked at Thomas. Your grandfather left out the best part. What part? The part where every day for 26 years he's chosen to stand at that gate, metaphorically, for everyone who needs shelter. We've helped 14 people over the years, gave them work, home, hope. That's Catherine's real legacy. Not the ranch, but the water rights, off the open gate. Thomas looked between them, understanding dawning. You're telling me this because I'm scared to leave. We're telling you because leaving doesn't mean the gate closes. Maxwell leaned forward. You go to Boston, you learn, you grow. But you remember home is where you're brave enough to let wounded souls heal, including your own. The world out there, Grace said gently, it's not always kind, not always just, but that's why we need good men in it. Men who know what Montana taught, what your great-grandmother knew, that mercy matters more than comfort, that protection is strength, that standing costs something, but sitting costs more. Thomas nodded, couldn't speak yet, just nodded. You leave in 3 days, Maxwell said. You'll be scared, that's natural. But remember, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to stand anyway, choosing conviction over comfort, truth over lies, people over property. I'll remember grandfather. Good boy. Maxwell stood, old bones creaking. 72 years of hard living, but still strong, still standing. Now, your grandmother made pie. Apple. Let's eat it while it's warm. Tomorrow brings its own challenges. Tonight we celebrate being together. They moved to the dining room. 3 generations, connected by blood and story, and Catherine Donovan's wisdom reaching across death to shape life. Outside December, snow fell soft and endless, covering Montana, covering the ranch, covering the gate where 26 years earlier a frozen woman had collapsed and changed everything. That gate stood open still, would always stand open. Catherine's legacy, Maxwell's promise, Grace's triumph. Home wasn't a place. It was the people brave enough to open gates, to stand in cold dawn and carry frozen strangers to warmth, to fight territorial courts and social scandal, to choose mercy when the world demanded cruelty. Thomas would leave, would face his own gates, his own choices, but he'd carry this story, this truth, this knowledge that real strength was measured not in acres owned, but in lives protected. And someday when he faced his own frozen morning, his own stranger at his own gate, he'd remember. He'd remember and choose right, because that's what Donovans did. That's what mercy required, always.